So I just want to talk about Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread was the first Metroid game I've ever played. I thought it would be a good opportunity to finally pick the franchise up, and frankly, I was blown away. So this review will have spoilers, so keep that in mind. I am also going to not rebuke the game because I honestly did enjoy it. So that while there are some things I will criticize, in general, this review will focus on praise for the game because I liked it. That's the long story short. I thought it did a lot of things right. So even if it's not the flashiest game in some ways, I think given everything that went into it, I think it is pretty darn good, even for a AAA title. So yeah, let's just jump straight into it. First thing I like, background, ambience, atmosphere. Look at all of the background. Take a moment to look at it. The lighting, the detail on Samus's armor, the detail in general, and the unique map design. I really like all of this because each region combined with the soundtrack, each region of ZDR feels very distinguished and very unique. Sometimes they might blend into each other a little, but in general, you get a clear idea of which region is which. Like, if you had asked a Metroid player, or even a casual Dread player, what region is this? They would probably be able to tell you it's Frenia, because of the Chozo statues, the specific, the recognizable Shine Spark puzzle, etc., etc. And I think Mercury Steam did a very good job of this, especially considering that they were limited by the Switch's hardware. Because, let's be honest, the Switch is not the best console. It's a hybrid console, it is not the best when it comes to graphics. We were spoiled a bit. Players were spoiled a bit by Super Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the Switch is not, and this was recorded on my a regular Switch, by the way. I do not have a Switch OLED, but in general, I think even if the Switch is not the best console graphically, I think Mercury Steam did a very good job nonetheless, because this looks very good. Relatively speaking, this looks like a very well-detailed game, with a lot of effort that was put into the details in the background. And I can definitely appreciate that because it helps contribute towards the immersion of the game. And immersion is, I think, one of the biggest things players look for in a Metroidvania in general. So we'll get more into that later. But first off, the atmosphere, really, really good. Secondly, the gameplay. What you're seeing me doing right now is I am trying, quite futilely, because I did a full 100% clear of the game. It took me just under 15 hours. This was my attempt to, my various attempts, to get the Shine Spark, to solve the Shine Spark puzzle that's up there so I can get the plus 10 missile pack. And I think this Shine Spark puzzle is actually a good example of how I feel about the gameplay in general. And that is, it's hard, but satisfying. What I mean by that is, whenever you would fight a boss in Dread, from my experience, it would at first be really difficult. You would have no idea what you're doing, you wouldn't recognize the boss's patterns at all, and you would be completely thrown off. You'd be like, oh my god, this is difficult. And, of course, the bosses get harder over time, but in general, what I found is that after a few dozen attempts, you really start... And these attempts are very quick because the respawn points are generous. After a few dozen attempts, maybe just a dozen, you really get a sense for how the patterns work. You really get a sense for the boss in general, you get a sense for the movement you need to make, the times you need to parry, the times you need to slide, and all of that movement feels very, very slick. That's the thing, I think that's the best thing about the gameplay. The movement in general feels very open-ended and slick. Because while I'm struggling right now, there's just so much you can do in this game. You can double jump, you can slide, you can jump indefinitely once you get the power, once you get the space jump. You can do the Shine Spark, you can Shine Spark as a Morph Ball. You can do you can do the Morph Ball hopping. And everything about it feels so responsive and fluid. Especially since the game incentivizes you at times, and technically requires you to slide underneath certain enemies and bosses to succeed. And it just makes it feel so butter smooth. I can't stress enough how satisfied I was with the movement of the game. And that really tied into how the difficulty felt hard at first, but then once you got your groove on, it really just felt like a very entertaining experience that really rewarded you for getting that movement down. And I really appreciate that by Mercury Steam, or from Mercury Steam. Everything felt like the combat, because of this, the combat actually felt like I was in control, and I was able to really control my character. I was able to really control Samus throughout the duration of my playthrough. And this is part of the reason why I was able to do 100%. I don't consider myself a very talented gamer, but even I was able to do the toughest Shine Spark puzzles, because ultimately, once you get the movement down, it's very responsive, and the learning curve is quite satisfactory. Especially if you're doing 100%, because there are plenty of puzzles to challenge yourself with, there are plenty of opportunities to expand your knowledge of the types of movement you can perform, etc., etc. And I didn't even talk about phase shifting, but yeah, the movement feels really butter smooth. And that is a very strong reason why I think the gameplay is tough at first, but then over time, as you learn it, you really get a sense for just how powerful you can be in this game. Now, in terms of something I want to say, in terms of the actual combat, like not the movement, but in terms of the actual weapons that you use and the way you defeat the bosses, I'm mixed on this, because it's very authentic. The one thing I will say, it's very authentic to Metroid games in general, because at the end of the day, it is blast the enemy a lot, maybe in a few certain positions, jump around, and I think this is new to Metroid games, starting with Mercury Steam, parry. So it's parry, jump, and either shoot either shoot charge shots or shoot missiles. And I think, honestly, the good thing about that system is that it's very simple, and all you have to really do is A, aim, B, know how long you have to shoot for a certain amount of time before it becomes risky, and C, choose what weapon you want to use, because maybe ice missiles are more effective. But it's a very simple combat system, relatively speaking. The real dynamic thing is the movement, but the one thing I am disappointed by is it doesn't feel like there's much diversity in the movement, or sorry, not in the movement, in the actual ways in which you can, in the actual weapons you have. Because I think half of the power-ups in the game are extensions to the power beam. And, like, right now, what you're seeing me right now with, right now, at this part of the game, because this is late in the game, I think I have the charge beam, I have triple shot, I have the wide beam, and I have the diffusion beam. I'm pretty sure that's all of the beams I have. I may be missing one. But, in general, a lot of stuff, and I didn't even use the charge beam, I didn't even use the power beam that much in actual boss fights. I used the ice missiles. I shouldn't say it's confusing. It was a bit mixed to me, because you would use basically the same weapon, more or less, for the entire boss fight. Like, my preference was the ice missiles, so, and especially in the Raven Beak boss fight, I just used ice missile after ice missile after ice missile. I didn't use anything else. And I feel like, while that is authentic to Metroid games, that you use more or less the same attack, and I should also mention power bombs. Power bombs, those are nice as well. Like you're seeing me use, I think the cross bomb and the regular bomb to get to this missile. But yeah, long story short, I think the combat system is authentic. I think it's simple, but I also think there isn't much variety in it. Like, I would really appreciate if there were more ways to melee as Samus. Like, something, for instance, I think a good example of what I would want to see more of is when you fight the red Chozo soldier. I think it's the red Chozo soldier. That, or it's the golden Chozo soldier in Hanobia. When you're able to rip away the shield, the magnetic shield, like you parry it first and then you use the gravity beam to rip away the magnet shield. I love that. That is a really creative way to incorporate what's usually a non-combat spell into a combat scenario. And I would have loved to see Mercury Steam incorporate more of that even if it felt optional, even if it felt like you could just use missiles and succeed. I feel like there should have been a lot more optional ways to really engage in combat in this game. And I am happy that they added parrying. I think parrying, like, movement feels very fluid, and you get a lot of reward for being able to master it. But I would have liked to see them go further with it, if that makes any sense. So that's what I think on the gameplay, or that's what I think on the combat. The gameplay on a wider scale is much more than that, because obviously it's a Metroidvania. It involves a lot of exploration. It involves exploration, puzzles, backtracking, and first of all, the exploration aspect. I think if you're a veteran Metroid player, you will really like this game in terms of the exploration, because you will know exactly what you have to do. There are a lot of different directions you can go. There are a lot of hidden blocks that you can find for both optional and required pathways, and things like the storm missile having to lock on to a bunch of sensors. The game feels very fun to explore because, like I've said, the movement is very crisp, and on top of that, the game gives you a lot of interesting ways. It gives you a lot of interesting ways to move around, and it gives you a lot of interesting places to go to. And it rewards your exploration quite handsomely with an absolute crap ton of missiles, energy tanks, and power bombs. Like you see in my upper left hand corner, I have 249 missiles, 11 power bombs, and I think that's 10 energy tanks. Maybe my math is wrong, but I think it's 10, because I know at the end you get 275 tanks, I think 15 power bombs, and 12 energy tanks, not counting the base tank. And that's actually a lot of resources to use at your disposal. Like 275 missiles, you will never run out. You will never run out. Like when I was fighting Beak, never ran out. Like at worst, I would drop down to like 175 before I'd get some sort of refill. And I think honestly, that's incredible. The amount of reward the game gives you for exploring and for it's overkill, honestly. It just gives you so much to work with, and I really like that. I finally got the missile tank there. But yeah, I really like the exploration. The backtracking, this is something a more experienced Metroid player would be more in a position to talk about than I am. But from my experience, the backtracking largely felt like, with the exception of mini-bosses, it largely felt like SQ, for instance, where you get the storm missiles. I largely felt like it was, just me being honest, I largely felt like it was linear. But from what I've seen of Fusion gameplay, Metroid Fusion, I think it was less linear than Fusion, more linear than Super Metroid. I think it struck a very good balance. Because here's the thing about linearity versus non-linearity. You don't want the player to be confused, but you also want to reward their ability to discover things on their own, to take their own unique paths, to say, this is how I want to play through the game in my own way. So I think when Mercury Steam looked at this, and they were like, or they looked at Super Metroid, they looked at Metroid Fusion, and they thought to themselves, how could we make this the best of both worlds? I think what they really did was they said, we're going to have a fair amount of linearity, but we can also add in a bunch of non-linearity, especially in the form of puzzles, to really incentivize, or to really satisfy those veteran Metroid players who want some more, who want to find a bunch of secrets in the game. And in my opinion, I think that was a really good balance. Just speaking personally, I'm just gonna be honest here. I did have to look up certain pathways in the guide at times, in online guides at times. I was lost at times. I'm not gonna act like I didn't. I think a lot of people experienced the same thing, and I actually see a lot of threads on social media about people getting stuck and yada yada. So I think the linearity in that case is warranted because it helps get new players into the franchise while also having non-linearity aspects, optional non-linearity aspects to really, again, make the best of both worlds, to give the veterans what they were looking for, more along the lines of So I think there was a very healthy balance. I think ultimately Dread, and this might be a hot take, I think Dread is the best balance of, from everything I do know of Metroid games, I think Dread so far is probably the best balance of linearity and non-linearity so far. And take that with a huge grain of salt, because again, this is the first Metroid game that I've actually played. I've watched gameplay and speedruns of the other Metroid games, but I have never actually played them myself. But from what I know, I think there's a very healthy balance here, and the only thing I would have suggested Mercury Steam do is add even more secrets. And by secrets, I actually don't mean, again, I'll go into this a bit more later, I don't actually mean more missile tanks, more energy power-ups, none of that stuff. I actually mean more lore secrets. But we'll get to the lore in a little bit. So, gameplay. I think the combat was simple, authentic, maybe a bit too one-dimensional. Although parrying, obviously, is very welcome. I think the changes they did to parrying, from what I know about Mercury Steam's remake of Samus Returns, the changes were very welcome. In general, I feel like the movement is extremely good, and I think this is me looking up a guide, by the way. Movement extremely good, combat a bit derivative, but authentic and easy to learn. And the linearity, there's a good mixture of linearity to help newer players and non-linearity to really up the exploration factor. So that's what I think about the gameplay. And one more thing that I have just go over really quickly, the power fantasy. There is such a great power fantasy in this game. First of all, I think I agree with I saw a lot of comments talking about the Morph Ball in particular not being the first upgrade you get. I really liked that because it encouraged you to use other forms of movement that were not reliant on the Morph Ball. So I think that was a really good idea. And I also think that really slowly ramping up in power, like the way the individual power-ups are drip-fed to you, it's a very slow, gradual rise into godhood. Like what you're seeing right now is me with every power-up in the game. This footage is with me having the power bomb, the gravity suit, the space jump, and I think Mercury Steam did a very good job with the power fantasy for two reasons. One, when you do reach that endgame, you feel unstoppable. You really do feel unstoppable. Like, all of these enemies, they are fodder. I don't care about them. They are absolutely nothing to me. I just roll over them. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is, the way they were incorporated and slowly explained to the player, especially through the specific Chozo zones, like the Chozo rooms where you would get some of them, they would have a little demonstration that you could try out the ability in. I thought they were helpfully added into the game in a gradual power-up that culminated in some of the best abilities being rewarded only when you really felt like they were worth it. What I mean by that is, I don't want to say this about Metroid veterans because I don't know for sure how true this is, but I think one way to put it is that people were so used to having the Morph Ball that when they finally experienced not having it for a large portion of the game, they really realized just how much they love the Morph Ball. And it's the same thing magnified, especially for the gravity suit in the game, because you only get the gravity suit after you've had to deal with at least a few major water areas. And it's like, and for me personally, it was like, oh my god, thank goodness, I finally got the gravity suit. This thing, I needed this so badly. This is just gonna make things so much easier. And I felt so grateful to have that gravity suit. And it's the same thing for the double jump, the space jump, the screw attack. It just feels so satisfying in this game to finally get those power-ups that can accentuate your movement. Maybe less so the power-ups that don't, like for instance the diffusion beam, but you still feel that satisfaction because you have those moments. Mercury Steam carefully interlaced the game with moments where you just look at a door or you look at a certain area and you're like, oh my god, I know this power-up is in the game. I really want this power up right now. And then when you finally get it, you're like, yes, now I can go back to that area. I can finally get that power up. Yes, just yes. So I think the power fantasy was very well was quite executed, was very blah, was very well executed on Mercury Steam's part. And I think in general, adding all of what I said before in, I think it results in some very fun gameplay. Because most of the time you'll be running around, you'll be solving challenging but approachable puzzles, even for new players. And the puzzles are fun and rewarding. The exploration, there's a lot of area to explore. The different regions are very distinguishable and very interesting. And, like I said, the atmosphere was done quite well. And the combat, oh, I already went over to combat. But yeah, I feel like the gameplay, if anything, it feels like you can move so well. If I had to sum it up in one word, just movement. Movement. It's just, that's the real pro for this game. Beautiful, beautiful movement. And I think for a Metroidvania, being able to move in a way where you can navigate the regions and terrain properly, as well as having that immersion, it's so good. And the power fantasy was well executed. So that's enough about the gameplay. I want to go over to UI real quick. The UI, I think the map is very good. It's very simple. It's color-coded. I like the map quite a bit. The markers, they give you 6 markers. I think that's more than enough, personally. I don't think they should have let you have multiple markers of the same color, personally. But maybe there's some pointed out that I don't... Maybe there's some pointed out that I'm not getting. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think in general, the visual clarity and UI of the game are very clear. There's not anything that I would say I was very confused about, except the stuff that was intentionally hidden, like the puzzles or the hidden blocks. Everything like the actual enemy attacks, Samus's movement, and the terrain, like I think that's a phase shift gate right there to the bottom left of my screen. Everything felt very clear and very understandable. It didn't feel overcomplicated. It didn't feel like I had to look at a million things at once. So, not much visual clutter. In fact, the only visual clutter on the actual gameplay screen is the health and ammo UI on the upper left, as well as, and you can toggle the map off, the map on the upper right. So there is actually very little in terms of visual clutter, which I think is definitely an advantage in terms of the user experience and the UI. So that's just something I wanted to go over very, very quickly. And of course, you can fast navigate around the map. Crap. I actually forgot to mention something. Let's go on to, I'll cover sound next, but before I do, I want to make one quick note. There is one criticism I do have about the control schemes, about the controls and the way they relate to the movement, is that I did this on a, I don't know what the official term is. I don't know if this is a pro controller. I used the one where you put the two for my controller, I used the one where you have the Joy-Con handle that you can slide the, not the actual Switch itself, that you can slide the two Joy-Cons into, and it looks kind of like a square. But, I used that. The only issue I had was that at times when I was trying to do things like, I would try to use the grapple beam instead of the, what was it? The grapple beam instead of the missiles. I would have a hard time because I feel like the way the controls were mapped out was a bit clunky. The movement itself is butter. Like, once you get the movement down, it is really good. But in terms of the actual control scheme, some of it is straightforward. Some of it is pretty good. But then you have those moments where you just think about, where you think, okay, this feels a bit awkward. I would have appreciated if this was a bit more thought out. And part of the reason I say that is because I don't feel like they really used the directional pad on the bottom left of the Joy-Cons. They didn't really use the directional pad. You used the right arrow for the pulse radar, but that was it, from what I could tell. Maybe one of them was used for the map. But it felt like a lot of controls were mapped onto either the two adjustable either the two joysticks or ZL/ZR. And because of that, I feel like there are a healthy amount of times, at least in my experience, where you'll accidentally input the wrong command, especially while trying to do something like shine sparking, and that can be frustrating, admittedly. But once you do get the controls down, and when you do have those moments where the control scheme doesn't get in your way, butter movement just feels so good. So yeah, that is the one thing I will say about the movement. The control scheme may not be the best. But moving on from that, the sound. I've seen a lot of criticism towards the sound of Dread. And I get it. I do get it, because when you ask yourself, there are two questions you have to ask yourself regarding Dread's soundtrack. The first question is, does it feel atmospheric? And I would say the answer is a definitive yes, because most times it does feel like each region has a distinctive theme, and it feels like it really works as a world theme. Like for instance, in Super Mario Galaxy, you have all of the different planets have their own theme. That's what I mean here. They each have their own regional theme that really pops out to you and feels distinguished, and it feels very immersive. Now, that's the first question. The second question is, are there any bangers? Are there any songs that will really glue themselves into your memory? And I think the answer to that is no. I don't think there are any songs that really stick out to you in a, oh my god, this soundtrack is amazing, I just want to jam out to it for an hour. I don't feel like there's any of that in Dread. I feel like for the most part it's very retro, it's very atmospheric, and that isn't a bad thing. I just feel like there aren't many epic tracks mixed in. Because personally, I'm a fan of epic orchestral tracks, symphonic tracks, like for instance, Undertale's OST is a soundtrack I really like. I didn't feel like there was really much of that in Dread, so I can understand why there's a lot of division on that. With that said, I do appreciate that a lot of the soundtrack is atmospheric, and I understand why they went for that feeling. I just feel like, especially with boss battles, they could have popped off more. They could have been far more aggressive with the soundtrack. That's my personal take. You're free to disagree with me on any of this, by the way. That's just how I feel, both after reading comments about the soundtrack and after listening to it myself. What else do we have? I don't want to cover the lore just yet because I want to think about if I'm missing anything else. Oh, the E.M.M.I. Okay. I want to talk about the E.M.M.I. The E.M.M.I are the one part of the game. The E.M.M.I is the one part of the gameplay that I didn't cover yet. The E.M.M.I are interesting, in my opinion. If I had to describe the E.M.M.I in one word, and I'm just going to be honest here, I think they create a lot of dread. I do not think they are scary. I think in general, what the E.M.M.I convey is a lot of I think the best way to explain this is to distinguish between fear and anxiety. When you fear something, and this is just my opinion, when you fear something, you have this great aversion to it. Like, it is a fight or flight instinct. Like, you see this thing, you are like, oh my god, I need to run away. I need to get as far away from this thing as possible. This thing is literally going to scare the daylights out of me, and I am going to just be jump scared. I'm going to be horrified out of my mind. I'm going to literally have nightmares about this thing. It's just going to terrify me in my sleep, that sort of thing. And you might be saying, well, isn't that exactly what the E.M.M.I are? No, I don't think that's the case. What I think the E.M.M.I do is the E.M.M.I are a threat that you know exists. And you are fully aware of it at all times. You know that at any moment, the E.M.M.I may detect you, and they are going to chase you, and there is a high probability that if they catch you, they're going to kill you, because the window to parry them is notoriously difficult. But that isn't fear, I think. It's not maybe there's a difference between pee your pants type of fear and I dread looking at this, I dread every moment of this, I do not want to be caught type of fear. Like, it's the fear of getting killed versus the fear of getting caught. You wouldn't react the same way to getting killed, or to getting stabbed, that you would to having to stare at someone trying to avoid getting caught by them. Maybe this is probably going to be the most controversial take I have. It's very difficult for me to explain. I really do think there is a difference between knowing about the threat and the threat being very predictable and readable, and the threat and other situations where the threat is unpredictable. The threat is very the fast, violent. It just pops out to you out of nowhere. I don't think the E.M.M.I are that, because if I had to describe the E.M.M.I in one word, it would be predictable. I think they are honestly predictable, because they have certain patterns that they navigate, and there is clear counterplay to each of them. That is not something I feel great fear towards. I feel dread at times, like when the green E.M.M.I is looking at me while I'm in Phantom Cloak, when the blue E.M.M.I is hunting me down, when the purple E.M.M.I is constantly tracking me. I do feel dread at that, but I don't feel scared, because it's not something that's popping at me out of nowhere. I am well aware of the threat, and I am well aware of what's going to happen. Whereas in a horror game, the key, I think, is unpredictability. You don't know what's going to happen next. And it doesn't have to be jump scares. It just has to be, for instance, it just has to be a guy breaking out of a wall out of nowhere. Like, imagine the difference between knowing that the purple E.M.M.I tracks you at all times versus the green E.M.M.I, the cutscene where the green E.M.M.I literally drops in right in front of you in the cinematic. I would be afraid of the green E.M.M.I because that is unpredictable, that came out of nowhere, and I was not prepared. But in the case of the purple E.M.M.I, after the first time, I know what it's going to do, and everything after that becomes predictable. So I hope that makes sense. Maybe my definition of fear, of dread versus pure terror is different, but I gained a lot of dread from the E.M.M.I. I did not necessarily view them as terrifying, because to me, terrifying is unpredictable, and the E.M.M.I did not feel that way to me. They felt like a very annoying nuisance that could not be ignored, except for the purple E.M.M.I, but that's only because by the time I got to the purple E.M.M.I, personally, I had already got the speed boost, I had already got the phase shift, I had gotten the double jump. I could just run away from it easily. But outside of the purple E.M.M.I, all of the others had their ways in which they felt intimidating, and they caused a lot of dread, just not a lot of terror. So that's what I'll say on the E.M.M.I. A few other things I should probably note before I get into the lore, because I'm a writer, I'm a huge lore nerd, so this may take a while, but I think the terrain is good. I mentioned the map design. The level design, I think, is good. There are a lot of different places to explore. There's a lot of use. With the exception of the phase shift, I think there are a lot of places to use different abilities and succeed. Like, for instance, you just saw me use both the Morph Ball and the Shine Spark to get that power up. And I think the Power Bomb too. And that's a very creative combination. So there's a lot of room to use your abilities in a very unique way thanks to the layout of the maps and the regions. The one exception, like I said, or I should say there are two exceptions. The two exceptions are the Phantom Cloak and the phase shift. The phase shift, I feel like, is very good in theory. Maybe it was just because I didn't really mesh to the idea of the phase shift, but personally, I didn't really get into the groove of using it. I bet there are going to be veteran players who are like, oh, you can combo it with the speed boost, with the Shine Spark. And if that's the case, then sure, that sounds awesome. But for me personally, I just used the screw attack. I just kept using the screw attack mixed with the screw attack mixed with just regular jumping, because for me, that was enough. And I didn't feel like there were a lot of places where I needed to use a a phase shift sensitive door in a way that actively worked in my favor, or face one that actively worked against me. At most, they were just annoying. Whereas the other one I wanted to mention, the Phantom Cloak was even worse. But the difference with the Phantom Cloak is that with the Phantom Cloak, you and this is applying to actual movement, by the way. It's not applying the terrain. It's not applying to combat. With the Phantom Cloak, there were only a few. I think there were only a few doors in the game that required you to have the Phantom Cloak. I think the reason that ended up happening is because Mercury's team probably realized late on in development that the Phantom Cloak, just having to slowly walk into a Phantom Cloaked door or a sensor-based door, it's not fun. It's slow. It kind of messes up the flow. So I think that's why they didn't really incorporate the Phantom Cloak that much. But in terms of movement. But outside of those two abilities, I think that in general, all of the other abilities had a place to be used in a creative way. Maybe a third example would be the Storm Missile, because you would only use it for the storm doors, but I digress. What else? I guess I could talk about the bosses individually. Kraid. I want to talk about Kraid. Kraid was very easy. Kraid, I didn't know about the Morph Ball trick, but Kraid... The disrespect. I know a lot of people were glad that Kraid was... I know a lot of people were glad that Kraid was included instead of Ridley, but still, the sheer disrespect that was given to Kraid... I don't have any words for it, because even I could tell, like, oh my god, he is just such a pushover. He literally throws super slow nail clippings at you, and that's one of his best attacks. He barfs at you, he throws nail clippings at you, and maybe he does something like he no, I'm thinking of the underwater boss. Maybe he lashes at you with his hand. That's the best case. It's true that he was restrained partially, but he still felt really like a pushover. It still took me a couple tries, honestly, but he wasn't as hard, I think, as Corpius was at first to me. And then Corpius was fine. I liked that Corpius went invisible and you were only shooting the Phantom Cloak power up in his tail. I thought that was a good detail. I thought that was a good touch, or a good touch. The underwater boss, the underwater eye, the clamshell type of thing. I thought it was pretty easy once you figured out what you need to do. In general, that's the case for all the bosses, but I think especially in that boss's case, it just felt like a pushover immediately. I think one boss I had trouble with, outside of the final boss, I actually didn't have that much trouble with Experiment J57. I had trouble with SQ, because to me, SQ felt like one of those bosses that is really annoying because it's hard for you to damage them. Like, the windows for damaging them are surprisingly low, and in general, and plus I think SQ was the first one to have homing missiles. Those homing missiles are an absolute pain to deal with. In general, homing missiles are something else entirely, so that was something that I experienced. I think SQ was hard, relatively speaking. Take a shot every time I say relatively. I don't know if I want to talk about Ravenbeak just yet. Oh yeah, the central units were pushovers. I honestly don't know why the central units were made that easy. Like, the first few, I get it, but then after that, it's like, okay, these central units are just doing the same exact thing over and over, and I could just shoot the flaming disc projectiles, so I don't understand what's really going on here. I didn't really feel like there was much of a challenge in the central units. Maybe there wasn't supposed to be, but I would have probably liked it if they had at least incorporated the themes of their respective E.M.M.I into the situation. I don't know. Just my 2 cents regarding that. What else? I think that about covers it. So we're gonna go into the lore now. Okay. So context first. Oh yeah, and I like the ammo recharge stations. Context on this first. I know a good amount about Metroid lore. I don't know everything about it. I haven't read the manga. I have not like I said, I've only actually played Dread, and I mostly only know about the 2D series. I don't know that much about Utter M. I don't know about Cursed Name. I don't know much about the Prime trilogy, and I don't know. Obviously, no one knows about Prime 4. But what I was gonna say is the lore. What Sakamoto does with Dread is there's a lot of show don't tell, and that's a staple I think of the Metroid series as a whole, with the exception of Utter M. And in Dread, I have very mixed feelings about it because the lore. Let me put it like this: the lore that is there is good. The lore that is there is good. I like the story. I like the characterization. I really liked the way they used Samus's voice. Like it was she was dead. Okay, Samus in general was done so well in this game. Like I think they really took the criticism from Utter M to heart, and they were like, "Oh my god, we just need to go full Doomslayer with her," and that's exactly what they did. She is an absolute badass in this game. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. Absolute badass. She is just everything from her motion capture scenes and I mean in the cinematics to her suit design to her actual actions in the plot. Like for instance, the utter disrespect she gives to Kraid, the way she finishes off Experiment J57, the way she just stands her ground against every E.M.M.I. and literally sucks the life out of the last one, the orange one. That is just so cool. And that's not even mentioning her voice. Like I think it was Nikki Garcia. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There were only 2 voice actresses who were listed in the credits. It was Holly Renault and Nikki Garcia. I think it was Nikki that did Samus's voice here, and she only speaks 2 times. Once to Quiet Robe, when she says in Chozo that I will handle it, and that is just, that itself, the fact that the Chozo have their own language, and the fact that it just feels so fluid and so properly incorporated into the game, like you see the language actively present throughout, maybe not the UI, but in the like in the level design, you just see the text everywhere, the Chozo text, and I think you also see it in the loading screen. That was crazy. The fact that Samus and Quiet Robe and Raven Beak, they all spoke in Chozo, crazier. That just sounds, it just adds to the immersion so much. And most importantly, that scream at the very end was so good. That was, I think that might be my favorite part of the game. The fact that she just finally, after 35 years, she just finally let loose. Just let all of her rage go in that one moment. And just absolutely kicked the crap out of Ravenbeak. I love that. That was my favorite part of this. That combined with the Metroid Suit was my favorite part of the whole game. Because it just feels so goddamn satisfying and in character. Seeing her finally break loose after all of that calm, because she cares about life. She loves animals. We know it's canon that she loves animals. She saves them all. She tries to save them when she can. So for her to finally just let loose this normally gentle individual who usually has to put on a stoic persona, for her to finally naturally let loose is just insane to me. It really feels like the culmination of her arc, in that she finally has come to terms with things and accepted who she is. And I really like that. I absolutely love that. That was definitely my favorite part, and I think it was fully deserved. Not to mention that the voice actress, again, I think it was Nikki, just nailed it. Absolutely blew it out of the water with that scream. Really good. definitely my favorite part of the game. Really glad that she put in. Really glad that she just let her voice box go. let her voice block. Let her voice box go loose. That's what I wanted to say. But and then that's not the disservice to other voice actors. Like I don't know who voiced Ravenbeak, but Ravenbeak's voice was good. Quiet Robe's voice was good. All of the voices felt good, and in the dialogue in general, I don't feel like. Sorry. I don't feel like there was too much dialogue in the game. In fact, I feel like there could have been situations where there could have been more dialogue, but I'll get into that and I'll get into that shortly. But in terms of the dialogue, I think for a Metroidvania, it was actually quite restrained, and that's a good thing because it fits very well with the nature of Metroid. It's a very silent game in terms of actual dialogue and actual voices. Samus is not a talker. She's usually very professional and stays silent during her job. Like, you see her on the elevator right now. She's not saying anything. She's just deep taking breaths and just focusing, thinking, probably. So she's not a talker. She only speaks very, very rarely. And that just feels very authentic to both the game series as a whole. Again, it adds to the immersion, and to her as a character. And I think that's something that people really hated about Utter M. Maybe it was less that she talked more and more that I think her personality was off, but I'm not going to go into Utter M. I don't know enough about it to make any definitive statements. But, yeah, the dialogue was good. The voice actors and voice actresses, good. Samus, the few moments where Samus actually talked, I am so glad they actually let her talk. They let her talk just enough. Just when it was absolutely necessary and when it would have the maximum impact. And I am all for that. I am all for that. She doesn't have to be completely silent. It's not about her being completely silent. It's about the few things she says. If you've ever watched Phineas and Ferb, it's not about when Ferb doesn't talk. It's about the things Ferb says when he does talk. 'Cause you know, whenever he talks, he has something to say that will really capture the audience. And that's the same thing I felt with Samus in this game. So if that makes I hope that makes sense. I'm not the best at usually explaining my thoughts. So I thought that was really, really good. Now, in terms of the actual plot, I'm mixed on this because on one hand, it gave us a lot of answers. Like, it gave us the answers of what happened to the Chozo, why was there division among the Chozo people, among the tribes, were there any Chozo remaining, and if so, why hadn't they gotten into contact with Samus? What else? How powerful were Chozo warriors really? What were their fighting styles? We saw that through all of the bosses, including Ravenbeak. There were a lot of things that were answered here that definitely contributed to the narrative and the world as a whole. And I will say, the arc, I think, did wrap up in a nice bow, because I think Samus finally came full circle from fighting the Metroids to truly becoming one of them. I think that was Sakamoto's entire goal with her arc, and if it was, then he most certainly succeeded. Plus, I think also getting over Ridley was another thing, but again, I don't know enough about that to comment. But I think in terms of that, and in terms of contextualizing some of the bigger questions in the Metroid franchise pre-Dread, like the questions that were in the air after Fusion, I think Sakamoto did a very good job explaining those. What I think Sakamoto did not do enough of is not provide, and the writers in general, is provide world building. And what I mean by world building is all of the stuff you see on the screen right now is ZDR. And ZDR is just one planet that's just going to get blown up at the end of the game. Again, I gave the spoiler warning at the beginning. And when you think about it, that's not really that much. Now, I'm not saying there has to be this whole treasure trove of world building down to the finest detail. All I'm saying is that I would have appreciated something like, for instance, an enemy archive, an enemy glossary, for instance. An enemy glossary, what else? Deeper, more context on the E.M.M.I. How were they? how and why they were created, not just maybe to take down the X-Parasites, how and why they were created, what some of their special quirks were outside of their glowing eye and their unique adaptations. What armor were they made of, and why did Samus call it the strongest stuff in the universe? Like that, those are all questions I would have wanted to be answered. It doesn't have to be overly specific. I think what I want to say is, all I wanted was for there to be more conversations with Adam, the actual Adam, not Ravenbeak posing as Adam. Or maybe Ravenbeak would give this information. Just information in general about the E.M.M.I, maybe ZDR giving some history about the Chozo tribes. Well, he wouldn't want to give info about the Chozo tribes because that would give him away. But, you know what I mean. Just more information, maybe in the Federation too, and anything that happened post-Fusion. Because we don't know what happened between Fusion and Dread. That gap is still... We don't know how long the gap was or what happened during that gap. That's the type of stuff I would have wanted to get more context on. Not down to the finest detail, just enough to be like, okay, we can plot out, we can say confidently that we know how all of the players are, how all of the major players are acting right now, and we know enough about all of the main antagonists, about the protagonist, blah blah blah, to really gain a good understanding of that can really enhance the worldview and really boost the immersion by adding more context, even if that context is not literally directly related to Dread itself. Like, for instance, the E.M.M.I giving the name of the company that, I forget their exact name, giving the name of the company that created the E.M.M.I, that isn't directly relevant, I think, to Dread, because it doesn't matter who created the E.M.M.I. It's still a nice touch. That's the type of stuff I would have wanted to see more of, because the one thing I think the Metroid universe lacks the most of is world building, because it feels like everything focuses on the major plot elements in the main story, rather than going more in depth into the details of like how the Federation force works, the space pirates, maybe even things that Samus likes to do, some of her pastimes, like maybe the design or the layout of her ship. These are the types of things that I would love to know. And sure, they don't have to be utterly specific, but it's just what really enhance the immersion in the worldview for me. This is going to be a very hard Shine Spark puzzle coming up. I hope that makes sense. That's the one thing I would have wanted more from the lore. But from the lore that was there, I feel like it was satisfying. I feel like it was well written. I do feel like there are some plot holes. For instance, I have no idea how ZDR exploded. Like, all I know is that the ship crashed into it after Samus went full Metroid. But that shouldn't have been enough to blow up the planet. You know what would have been great? It would have been great, for instance, if the way she adjusted the thermal controls in Cataris created a chain reaction that actually disrupted the planet's entire flow. Or maybe that combined with something Ravenbeak did. Well, I don't think maybe something combined with what Ravenbeak did would have led to the actual destruction of the planet. You get what I mean? Just something that would have, things that would have addressed those plot holes a bit more, given a bit more context as to why they happened. Nothing that's too big of an issue, just minor details. I remember there's one thread on Reddit about how, on why Ravenbeak couldn't have just gotten a Metroid from SR388 before the Thada tribe sealed them all away. If his entire plan was to copy the Metroid DNA and create an army of Metroids. I don't know why he didn't do that, personally. Maybe there's a better explanation to it. You know what I mean. But, yeah. It's just, the lore that is there is good. I just wanted more of it. And I think it should have been put more directly into the game through either artifacts you could find, conversations with the actual Adam, maybe, and, yeah, details like that. That's what I would have really, really wanted to see in Dread. So that's basically the lore. But I will say one more thing. Regarding some other stuff about the lore, I think Ravenbeak was a great antagonist. He kind of came out of the blue, but he really felt like the villain that just took up the mantle of the entirety of everything Samus was fighting against. Because he was all about weaponizing the Metroids. He was all about... Because Samus's goal initially was to get rid of the threat of the Metroids. And even after that, it was to ensure that the Metroids were not used, or the Metroid DNA was not used for evil purposes. And Ravenbeak was everything against... was the entire opposite of that. Not only that, he was also the killer of the entire, Tora tribe. Yeah. Thora? I think it's Thora. The entire Thora tribe. So, to put it one way, Ravenbeak just appeared only in this game. He did appear in a teaser in one of the screenshots, or one of the gallery images in Samus Returns, but he really felt like he came out of the blue, but he was introduced and characterized in a way where it really felt like he was the thing that Samus had been working up towards to defeat in her entire arc. Because he represents the active threat that the Metroids pose, as well as the direct threat to the Metroids. He is the threat to the universe, the threat to the Metroids. And it's not the X-Parasites, because the X-Parasites are not like, one coherent being. They're more of like a species. He was the one that really said, I stand against all of your ideals, Samus, and I will stop you. And it's not like Ridley, because Ridley was just a serial killer. Now, that isn't a bad thing. Ridley was a mass murderer, but that isn't a bad thing. What I'm saying more along the lines is that, the good thing about it is that he really felt like the thing that Samus was meant to defeat, and I like that a lot. And I already mentioned how Samus was extremely well characterized. I think Quiet Robe, for the brief amount of time he was shown, was very well done. I liked how Quiet Robe was, and this is just speculation, how he was supposedly able to at least partially resist the X's influence enough that, combined with his memories and consciousness, the X felt compelled to give itself up to Samus and save her. Although I don't think it knew it saved her, personally, but... Speaking of which, the Metroid Suit. God damn. I love that Metroid Suit. I love that Metroid Suit so much. The first time I saw it, the first time I got a clear image of it, when, at first when she was, sucking the energy out of, Okay, let me give some context first. When Dread was announced, I was afraid, because Samus still had the Metroid DNA. But I was really worried that what Sakamoto was going to do was he was going to get rid of the DNA entirely. Because that would have been a way to wrap the entire arc up with a nice bow, just to get rid of the DNA so that there are no longer any more Metroids. The threat is gone, and that is the end of that. But, you know, that is such a boring way to end it, because that goes against what Samus is trying to do. She's trying to redeem herself for the fact that she did kill all the Metroids. And because she killed all the Metroids, now the X-Parasites are loose. Now people like Ravenbeak are... Well, actually, no. Ravenbeak would have been in a better position if she hadn't killed the Metroids. But it's still the idea that she actually worsened, in a way, the universe's situation by getting rid of the Metroids. And it feels, to an extent, like her responsibility to carry on their legacy in a way that can be used for good. As well as the Tora tribe. It just feels like, ultimately, it makes more sense for her to carry on the DNA, the legacy, with her as the last Metroid, because it feels like that is her path to redemption, that is her fate, because her fate is so intertwined with the Metroids from the get-go, and it was solidified in Fusion. So for it to come full circle, for her to finally get that full decked-out Metroid suit, it's so good. I love that suit. I think that suit needs way more fan art than it's been given. I really hope more artists draw it, because such a beautiful suit. Well, I shouldn't say it's beautiful in an unsettling way. And I think that's the point. But, yeah, I think in general, it would have been wrong for her to lose the DNA, because it would have gone against how intertwined her story is with those Metroids. Because And plus, again, like I said, it would just feel cliche, kind of boring. Like, obviously, the DNA is gone, no more Metroids. And then at that point, can you really call the franchise Metroid at that point? Can you really call it Metroid if there are no Metroids left? Plus the whole meme that Samus is Metroid, blah, 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 blah. But, yeah. I could probably do a more in-depth lore analysis video at some point if you guys want. But, I thought the direction Sakamoto took things was very good. Again, I thought that he should have added, or I think the entire team should have definitely added more in the ways of optional lore content, especially for veteran players to discover and explore. Like more optional regions that don't have the rewards as power-ups or bombs, but as artifacts and optional conversations with Adam, that sort of thing. But yeah, I felt like the lore was very satisfying, if a bit underutilized. And, geez, I think I've covered almost everything, haven't I? The teleporters are I love the teleporters, by the way. The teleporters are a very nice touch. They make things a lot easier. There were some times, I will admit, where the way some areas would get locked off at certain points in the game, it would make it awkward to navigate. Like, for instance, I think I mainly had this issue in Gavaran when trying to get back to Elune. It was hard for me to do it because at one point, I think, one of the teleporters led me to an area where there was no way to get to the, because all of the access hatches were closed. That was annoying, but other than that, I've been rambling for too long, so let me just... Oh yeah, I love the Morph Ball launchers, by the way. The Morph Ball launchers are so fun. I have to wonder if the Morph Ball launchers were included as a reference to, like... I think there's a Metroid pinball game. I wonder if they were included as a reference to that. Either way, those are really fun. I love those. I love all the little things you can do with the Morph Ball. But, yeah, I've been going on for a long time, so let me just wrap up. I think, in general, the gameplay is good. The gameplay is good, even if the combat feels a bit one-note. I think the lore is great. There just should have been more of it, especially more optional lore. I also think there should have been more optional exploration and probably some more sequence breaking. In terms of sequence breaking, it's a very tough... I've said it already. It's a very tough balance to make. But, you know, speedrunners will find a way. Metroid speedrunners are geniuses at sequence breaking, so they'll definitely find a way. And I doubt Mercury's Steam will be against it, because they know that one of the things players love the most about Metroid is that ability to be non-linear, is that ability to sequence break. Because they started off as a Castlevania developer, too. So, I mean... But then again, Castlevania... Never... You get my point. But, yeah, UI is good. Sound isn't great, but it's not bad. The bosses were a bit challenging at first, but they were very easy to learn and defeat. I assume on hard mode that Raven Beak in particular was a nightmare, and I assume on hard mode it's obviously even harder. But that's an interesting challenge. Sound was fine, not great, not terrible. It did the job it needed to in the from an atmospheric It did the job it needed to from an atmospheric perspective, not from a combat perspective. I've talked about the lore, the combat gameplay. I think one more thing I'll say. Oh yeah, the voice acting, again, very good. And very, very cleverly used. Again, Metroid is mostly a show, not tell, atmospheric experience. So for the dialogue to be there, but to be carefully utilized only in the most impactful moments was a good choice. Adam actually being Ravenbeak all along, that was a great twist that a lot of people may have picked up on at first. I didn't. It completely passed over my mind. The X-Parasites being involved, that was good. Because the X-Parasites obviously would find some way to be involved. Those bloody things. Those bloody jelly beans. But, yeah, the last thing I will say is, when it comes to the collectibles, I mentioned that I wanted there to be more lore artifacts and, just optional places you could go to, not for an item, but for just looking at the background, maybe, or just basking in an experience. because Metroid is, to a large extent, a very experience-oriented game. On top of that, I also really would have preferred if Mercury Steam had stuck with, and this is something I do know for a fact, if Mercury Steam had stuck with the tradition of having items, or sorry, having gallery images and suits based on a time, not only 100% clear, but a time-based clear as well. Because like the way, if you're unfamiliar with the Metroid franchise, the way it works is in the past games, you would get different versions of Samus's suit the faster you completed the game, to the point where the fastest clear would reward you with her Zero suit, because that's how it was in the original Metroid, and it's been a legacy that's been carried on ever since then, including in the Samus Returns remake. So I actually don't understand why Mercury Steam didn't do that. I can understand why they went with 100% clear, but I think they should have mixed 100% clear and they should have mixed the rewards between 100% clear and time-based a lot better, and they should have added more of those rewards. That's my personal opinion. I think there should have definitely been more incentive that way. I also think that there should have been an expert mode. Like, hard mode is just double damage dealt by enemies. I think there should have been an expert mode that was maybe it would be timed, maybe certain puzzles would be harder, maybe certain E.M.M.I would have their abilities enhanced, just something along those lines. And maybe it would be literally impossible to escape the E.M.M.Is. Maybe they would reduce it from 2 chances to 1. There are a bunch of things they could do for a potential expert mode, because hard mode does feel a bit disappointing when all it is double damage. But, yeah. I think, to wrap up, I mostly liked the game. I think it was definitely a great Metroid game. I think for a Nintendo AAA title, it lives up to the hype. It's not the greatest thing, because yes, as I've mentioned, it does have some drawbacks. Some minor... I think most of the drawbacks are relatively nitpickish, but in general, I think it was a great game. I think it was a terrific return to form for the Metroid franchise. I think it was a great way to summarize... One review described it as the culmination and the perfection of the 2D Metroid format, and I largely agree with that. Outside of the sequence breaking, the amount of sequence breaking, and the way collectibles are obtained, I think it largely is the best Metroid. Again, take it with a grain of salt. The best 2D Metroid to date, because it really feels like Mercury Steam has polished the formula to pretty much a near perfect extent. Like, everything they can do now is just new abilities, minor touch-ups, that sort of thing. And that is really impressive. So I'll be really interested to see what they do for a hypothetical Metroid 6. I'll be interested to see what they may change, what Retro Studios may change for Metroid Prime 4. And, there was something else I've completely forgotten. But yeah, I really like the game. Metroid veterans will definitely like this game. I think new players will have a surprisingly easy time playing this game. It's probably a lot easier to pick up than, for instance, the original Metroid, or I think it was Metroid 2 before the remake that was really hard to learn. But I think this is a type of game that has the right balance, that it's great for veterans, great for new players, and it is overall a very satisfying experience that is a worthy contender for one of the great Metroidvania games. Not one of the best Metroidvania games of all time, because I don't think the stars have aligned for it to really be like that, because when you compare it to Hollow Knight, when you compare it to Ori and the Will of the Wisps, the graphics are just, even when comparing it to the Switch's hardware, their graphics are just on a whole nother level. Their graphics are on a whole nother level. Their story maybe is on a whole nother level. Their sound design, in this case, relative to Dread, but it's still a really great Metroidvania game, and I am really glad to have played it.
I do not regret playing it for 1 minute. I do not regret grinding it out over the weekend. I do not regret grinding to 100%, doing all those Shine Spark puzzles, because this game felt satisfying. It felt satisfying, it felt fun, it felt like a good conclusion to the Metroid arc, and just thumbs up. If I had to give it a score out of like, if I had to give it a score out of 10, I would probably give it somewhere like an 8. It's really good, I really love it, and I would gladly play it again. In fact, I probably will play it again at some point. Probably to clear out the hard mode, probably to get the rest of the gallery images, to try and cut down on my time. I don't know how I'm gonna... It's gonna be a nightmare trying to cut down on my time, I'll tell you that much. But, yeah. I just really love Metroid Dread, and that's basically it for me. So, if the question at the end of the day is, should you buy Metroid Dread? I would say, if you're a fan of Metroidvanias, absolutely. If you're a Metroid veteran, absolutely. If you're unfamiliar with Metroids and Metroidvanias in general, and you only just heard about Metroid, that's a tougher call. I would say that this is probably one of your best ways to get into the series, even though its plot lies at the end of the series. Alternatively, you could probably take a look at trying to get Samus Returns on the 3DS, maybe. Alternatively, you could look into... I think the Wii U Virtual Console has some of the others. I think Super Metroid is on the SNES, Switch Online. So there are definitely other ways you can get into the series. I think Dread is probably one of the better ones to choose, maybe. I'm not the expert on this. I think it is, because this was my first game, and I didn't have that hard of a time, except when it came to the Shine Spark puzzles, but obviously those were optional. But, if I had to give a yes or a no to should someone who has never played a Metroidvania before pick up this game, yes, I think it is worth your time. I think you would really like it. It's different taste for everyone, but I think as long as you're not really that deep into pure non-linearity, you're not that deep into a diverse combat system, or you want an absolutely riveting soundtrack. If you're not worried about any of those things, pick this game up. It'll be worth your money. It'll be worth it to get more Metroid in the future. And goddamn, Mercury Steam did it. Thank you, Mercury Steam. Thank you, Mr. Sakamoto. Thank you, Nintendo, for finally bringing back Metroid, and for finally giving it the marketing and the community. Oh, here I go. I'm gonna go after the boss. But I'm not gonna... You guys can watch the video. This is my part 5. This is my finale for my playthrough. It's on my YouTube channel. But I'm gonna go and chase it. I'm gonna go on my video and chase the boss after this. But yeah, I would just recommend it. I think it's a great way to get into the franchise, and I think it is largely satisfying. So that's about it from me. You can find my my full playthrough playlist in the description, and feel free to comment. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Feel free to comment. Feel free to tell me. Feel free to talk about it with me. I'm lonely as hell, so I'll gladly talk with you about it. Check out my socials, and yeah, thanks for watching. And I'm sorry that I rambled on for so long. I know I can ramble.